Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal Podcast, a special longevity seminar weekend. Gennady and I have just come from a very exciting longevity seminar hosted by the California Transhumanist Party, our wonderful friends at Humanity Plus and Radfest. In this seminar was focusing on the book. Many contributors to that book. I can't do them all justice, but this book was edited and contributed primarily by Newton Lee, and it's a wonderful book. I've already done a lot of interviews on this subject. I'm pleased to be joined by one of those contributors, and the chair of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, Gennady. It's good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah. I'm very pleased to be here. I think it was quite a successful event. It was an example of the transhumanist community, the transhumanist movement coming together in producing a work that is really the master compilation of contemporary transhumanist thinking. It is one of the largest transhumanist publications ever, and it brings together insights from a variety of disciplines, a variety of fields of endeavor that are all encompassed under this umbrella of transhumanism. So we have essays on life extension, on artificial intelligence, on philosophy, on history, on art, on culture, and furthermore, on politics. My chapter, which is chapter 5 in the Transhumanism Handbook, is called The United States Transhumanist Party and the Politics of Abundance. I've actually made that chapter freely available online on the Transhumanist Party website, transhumanist-party.org, in the spirit of this mindset of abundance. And that was actually the subject of my presentation during the seminar today. Each of the authors who were in attendance had about 10 minutes to present, and it is really challenging in 10 minutes to determine what one's areas of focus should be, especially for the Transhumanist Party, given how many areas of endeavor we are involved in. And my chapter in the book is 60 pages, so I was thinking, what could I do in 10 minutes to do justice to a chapter that is 60 pages. And I realized, because of the time frames of publication and how long it generally takes to get the content assembled and proofread and ultimately released by an academic publisher like Springer Nature, my essay was current up to December 31st, 2018, in terms of chronicling the key developments in the history of the Transhumanist Party and the key achievements that the Transhumanist Party had undertaken and accomplished. So for this presentation, I decided to essentially extend that narrative a bit further into 2019. And I decided to lead with a discussion of this pervasive scarcity mindset, which really drives a lot of the toxicity in contemporary politics. And I continued by discussing how transhumanist politics is different, how both in the short term and in the long term, transhumanist politics seeks to overcome this mindset of scarcity, and how sometimes it's a challenge, but nonetheless it's a challenge that we need to take on. And I used that to lead into some of the concrete initiatives that the Transhumanist Party has undertaken in 2019 in order to overcome that mindset of scarcity and also engage with the public. Examples of those initiatives are the I Am Transhuman campaign, which anyone can participate in, our success at the Nevada State Legislature in helping to amend Assembly Bill 226, which originally was quite an onerous and invasive kind of legislation. It would have prohibited even voluntary microchip implants, and we removed the prohibition on voluntary implantation as a result of our activism and our cyborg and transhumanism forum that we held at the Nevada State Legislature. Yes, indeed. And finally, I mentioned our recent transhumanist symbols project as an example of the abundance mindset, in that we encouraged our members to develop a wide variety of symbols that could stand for transhumanism in general, and we've essentially released those symbols out into the public domain so that anyone can take advantage of them, utilize them in their own communications and their own representations of transhumanism, recognizing that this is a broader movement and not a proprietary movement, which would be kind of an oxymoron anyway.
Mm-hmm. And of those, so I should say of this book, a lot of our members got a chance to read your chapter before they got their hands on the book, mm-hmm. which is a nice thing. If you haven't got a hold of this book, buy it. Beg, borrow, or steal, read this book. You don't have to read it in order, but you do have to read it. Now, your chapter, what other key messaging from this segment would you like to convey to our viewers?
So, in terms of my chapter, really the key messaging is in terms of the aspirations of transhumanist politics, because progress in human endeavors is neither automatic nor inevitable. It takes work to accomplish it. And we do live in a much more technologically advanced age, an age of much greater material abundance than our evolutionary ancestors experienced. But we're still held back by some of the same evolved mindsets that might have conferred a survival advantage in the Paleolithic era, but are counterproductive now. And transhumanist politics has as its primary aim the advocacy of dramatic technological progress in all areas of life and in all areas of technology, to push outward the boundaries of material scarcity, especially the scarcity of time that constrains our horizons and limits our ways of thinking. So the purpose of transhumanist politics is to introduce a completely different narrative into the political discourse. So much of mainstream politics is very short-term oriented. It's very adversarial. It's very zero-sum. The perception is that one's adversaries have to lose in order for one to win. And the Transhumanist Party, through its history, through its mode of operations, through the kinds of ideals that it champions, undertakes an entirely different approach. So we seek to be positive sum. We seek to build bridges with people. We seek in our own processes, for instance, our internal ranked preference ballots, or our openness to members from all over the world, to exemplify the new kind of thinking, the new transhuman era that we wish to bring about. And the chapter is a discussion of the specific ways in which we do that, of the specific events in which the Transhumanist Party has been involved, some insights from key figures within our party or experts whom we have engaged to provide their thoughts on a variety of disciplines. And you can see from that unfolding both a short-term set of goals as well as a longer-term set of aspirations for transhumanist politics that my chapter delves into in depth.
Mm-hmm. Very nice, very nice. You know, a few moments ago, you and I were talking about the role of third-party organizations. We were talking about strategies for really getting the most bang for your buck from this kind of operation. Now, you have done incredible work in presenting a serious-minded organization. You've done truly incredible work with making these inroads to legislation, defeating this horrible legislation that was nearly passed in Nevada, were it not for this transhumanist resistance. How do you feel about the idea that a third-party organization is constrained and has to focus more on a lot more on optics, a lot more on a certain kind of presentation, a certain kind of publicity, a certain kind of political theater, even, and things beyond. Where do we find a good balance there?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for your good words. They are greatly appreciated. And in response to your question, I think for a third party in American politics, because the obstacles are so great to achieving electoral success, really the focus needs to be on changing the terms of the conversation. And in order to change the terms of the conversation, of course, a party trying to do that has to set the bar higher for itself than the two major parties allow themselves to engage in terms of their conduct. So, for instance, there is a lot of toxic rhetoric thrown around by the Republicans and the Democrats at one another as well as within their own ranks. And if we want to be the party of principles, if we want to be the party of ideals pointing the way toward a better future, then we need to stay above that kind of rhetoric and above that kind of conduct. Because ultimately, a lot of people are upset with the state of contemporary politics, and they're looking for alternatives. They are even looking for alternatives within the major two political parties, which is one reason why Donald Trump attracted a lot of popularity. Even though he had a lot of egregious tactics, he was perceived as being different, as being refreshing in a certain sense. This is one reason why Andrew Yang is attracting a lot of attention within the Democratic Party right now, because his message is perceived as being a challenge to this conventional toxicity of mainstream politics. So for a third party to have that kind of reception, we also have to very strongly differentiate ourselves, but in a favorable manner, because I think the experience of Trump has shown a lot of voters that it's not differentiation for the sake of differentiation that matters. It's differentiation with a constructive goal in mind. So transhumanism's goals are highly constructive. We essentially seek a new, better era for our civilization, where science and technology can help solve some of our pervasive problems, where material scarcity can be alleviated, where all people can live longer, better, more fulfilled lives. And those are high ideals to strive for. We already have set our sights very high. And in order to approach those goals and begin tackling the many challenges in the way of those goals, our conduct also needs to be of that caliber.
Mm-hmm. Now, you and I have had some really interesting and extensive conversations about the symbology, the nomenclature around this organization particularly. Some people outside of the organization, or people in our orbit to some degree, have been critical of longevity as the highest priority in this organization. Do you think we're a longevity party? Should that be our focus?
Well, the first core ideal of the U.S. Transhumanist Party is that the Transhumanist Party supports significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. And we deem that core ideal to be so important that it is within the immutable part of our Constitution. So it cannot be amended away. And Zoltan Istvan, actually, when he founded the Transhumanist Party, also ran under three core principles. One is longevity, the other is secular values, and the third one is combating existential risk. And they had been rephrased into the core ideals when I became chairman to attempt to be more inclusive of a broader variety of perspectives. But really the essence is still there. Those are the key aspirations for transhumanists. And there are many other aspirations besides. Certainly other topics are not off limits. We support the acceleration and advancement of technology in all areas and affecting all areas of human life. But longevity is really one of our distinguishing features. No other political party, even a party with ambitions for positive political and electoral reforms, has addressed the subject of longevity as comprehensively and with as much passion, with as much erudition and as much evidence-based thinking as the Transhumanist Party has brought into the conversation. So I think to lose that would be a great shame, but fortunately we have a community that is actively interested in discussions of longevity, so that is very much going to continue to feature at the forefront of our platform and the rhetoric that we deploy.
Now, the Futurist New Deal, our slogan is radical life extension is closer than you think. I want to ask you, do you have any personal policy initiatives or institutional initiatives that you want to see undertaken that are not being addressed by this current primary or other structural concerns?
Well, I think there should be more of a discussion about the speed of regulatory approval processes for various emerging medical
right to
treatments.
Try. We need better right to try.
Yes, better right to try. Indeed, I would encourage transhumanists to look into models in other countries, for instance in Japan, where once a treatment has passed certain safety tests, part of the efficacy testing can be performed in the act of actually marketing those treatments and gathering data on actual subjects within the general population instead of doing potentially quite costly clinical trials. So that's one area that I would very much like to see discussed to a greater extent. Another area that I would like to see discussed is how to spur on innovation in terms of new entrants into the fields of developing these kinds of treatments. So in the United States we have a fairly restrictive patent system in that sometimes even drugs or devices that have been long available, far longer than the 20-year patent time frame, can get repatented because some other application for them is found. Or there are certain situations where, for whatever reason, even generic drugs or generic devices become monopolized by a single entity that then drives up the prices on them astronomically. So we need to find a way to have a truly open, competitive market for the development of these treatments so that these forces of competition can drive down the costs, and we don't have a situation where a single company can hold hostage the advances, both in terms of qualitatively new discoveries as well as ways to more effectively produce the drugs and treatments that are already available.
Now, right there you spoke of something that's akin to patent trolling. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of interesting conversations about policy notions and political philosophy. Would you say on this issue that you are a copy leftist?
Well, I would say there are a lot of libertarians too who are sympathetic to these positions in that they don't believe that it's really possible to monopolize an idea. Of course, they believe in property rights, so they believe that if you have physical things, if you have machinery, if you have certain designs, you should be free to deploy those in whatever way you choose, but you also shouldn't be allowed to restrict others from doing something similar or doing something derivative. So my view, I think, has a lot in common with the libertarian position, but it also has a lot in common with some thinkers on the left who advocate for more of an open source kind of paradigm. So
Lawrence Lessig.
Yes, Lawrence Lessig is a very good example of that. And I would advocate it both in terms of technological innovation, so in the realm of patents, as well as in terms of literary or artistic creation. So in the realm of copyrights, I'm a strong proponent of the Creative Commons license as a way of making work available, and in some cases Creative Commons licenses allow for derivative works to be created as well, because a lot of innovation really is derivative in a certain sense. Not everybody who originates an idea can take it all the way or see all of its logical implications. And if somebody who originates an idea and makes valuable contributions makes a decision that, it stops there, it stops with me and whatever I've been able to do to extend that idea, then that's really unfortunate because it can hamper some beneficial applications. So I'm in favor of a kind of Creative Commons broadly defined for as many areas of human endeavor as possible. If anyone has a good idea that can push outward the boundaries of what we can accomplish, then they should be allowed to deploy that idea. So I don't know if it's a strictly libertarian view or a strictly left-wing view. I would say it is very much a transhumanist view, and it's an example of the new kinds of paradigms and ways of thinking that we should be striving for in order to overcome the unique challenges of our era.
And we spoke of the core values of transhumanism as articulated in our Constitution. Now, and again, I think it bears repeating: universal longevity, escape velocity is the highest of that. And people who aren't on message with that in this organization, I think, are doing us all, to some degree, a disservice. But all of those things also are very much driven by advanced algorithms. Do you have concerns about intellectual property of the similar kind around open sourcing of algorithms, even in talking about more advanced things like superintelligence?
Yes. So I have reviewed in various capacities a lot of proprietary algorithms that are used for particular applications, and it's interesting because while I can't disclose the details of those algorithms, I can say there are certain areas of similarity among them. And a lot of entities that develop those algorithms, they think that they have the best and latest and greatest and most unique type of approach. But really, from the standpoint of someone who has seen a lot of them, I see many common areas, and perhaps areas where a lot of these entities are reinventing the wheel, or if they're doing something that makes sense to a lot of people, perhaps the proprietary aspect or the secretive aspect is kind of overkill on their part. That is, if they were to share this information with one another, I don't think that many people would be surprised. On the other hand, what this emphasis on confidentiality and proprietary development of systems does is it prevents scrutiny in the public eye of certain methods and assumptions and treatments within those algorithms that perhaps ought to be scrutinized. Now, I've been on record in saying I'm actually less worried about the smart algorithms of the future than I am about the dumb algorithms of today, the kinds of scorecard systems that are really quite deterministic, but what they do is they draw sweeping generalizations about people that happen to fall into a particular category. And of course, the most egregious example of that is the Chinese social credit system, which really is quite a totalistic system in attempting to classify people not just by their own behaviors and activities, but even by their associations. So having this discussion out into the open, having these algorithms developed in an open source fashion, allows scrutiny of assumptions which may be faulty. And those assumptions may be self-serving on the parts of certain entities. So, for instance, the Chinese government wants to monitor the population, restrict the expression of certain ideas, and maintain social order in their own view. And the social credit system allows them to do it. But without the requisite transparency, it really allows a lot of these assumptions to be built in that are detrimental to individual human beings. So when we look at future, more advanced algorithms that are actually learning from their own operation and their interaction with the external world, or artificial general intelligence, which may arise in the coming decades, we would certainly want the assumptions to be made available to the public so that anyone with ideas about how to improve them can weigh in.
By way of segue, today at our conference we met two gentlemen, and they do have a proprietary algorithm. So I will not mention the name of their company at this time. But these gentlemen were developing a natural language processing application that has pretty tremendous implications. This is something that would basically be allowing people to so much enhance their productivity and catalyze their work product and other efforts by going well beyond the digital assistants that we have access to today. And this is something that coming to this event, I skipped the lunch. I'm not a wealthy man. I paid the $27.50 using the 50% off discount. A lot of people that I spoke to, I said, "Are you coming to this? You're in Los Angeles. Why are you not coming to this?" They said, "It's too expensive." Please consider, all of you, your dedication to these organizations, your dedication to these discussions, because in this conversation with these gentlemen, I was so moved and impressed by this technology. We are looking at Moore's Law, techno-singularitarian takeoff. Tell me about your feelings about the singularity.
Yes. So I've been on record saying that I actually think humankind has had 3 technological singularities already. One in the agricultural revolution, one in the industrial revolution, and one in the information revolution that occurred during the mid-20th century. And the reason why I mention those is that their effect on the human condition, on what life is like after the occurrence of these technological breakthroughs, is such that the people prior to their advent would not have been able to foresee what life would have been like afterwards. So even the greatest minds of the prior paradigm would have only been able to see so far. For instance, Leonardo da Vinci, he was the paradigmatic genius of the agricultural age, and he foresaw some impressive contraptions, flying machines, for instance, but he wouldn't have been able to foresee the assembly line the way that Henry Ford developed it, or the kind of paradigm shifts in human well-being that originate from mass production. Now, Henry Ford, the author of the contemporary assembly line process, he would not have been able to foresee smartphones or the internet, because that's a fundamentally different paradigm of technology, a fundamentally different way of interacting with technology, and a fundamentally new set of capabilities that these kinds of breakthroughs made available. So likewise, from our current standpoint, being in this information age, it would be difficult for even the leading thinkers of our era, people like Ray Kurzweil, to foresee what would happen after the next singularity. Now, the next singularity would occur because of a convergence of a wide array of emerging technologies, but most particularly biotechnology, nanotechnology, automation, and artificial intelligence. All of those coming together to create possibilities that are not just arising from one of those fields, they arise from the synergies and interactions between those fields. So, as an example, artificial intelligence can speed up drug development in that the AI algorithms can process far more data than human researchers would be able to process. But also biotechnology and the advent of effective medical treatments for senescence can be greatly accelerated by the advent of nanotechnology and having, say, nanobots in our bloodstream going around repairing cells instead of having cruder interventions that are more characteristic of 20th century medicine. But when those advances interact with one another and open new possibilities, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for someone from our vantage point to anticipate all of the permutations, all of the interactions, and all of their secondary effects. So a lot of the fallacies that arise about the technological singularity, or what I would say is the next technological singularity, stem from assuming that the rest of the world is going to remain fairly static or fairly recognizable up to that moment, and then all of a sudden something changes in a snap second, and super intelligent AIs are now in charge of everything, and they are better at everything than humans are, and we are now obsolete. I don't think that is how this technological singularity is going to unfold. There's not going to be a single moment in time where, snap, it all happens. That's the kind of hard takeoff scenario that I don't subscribe to. I subscribe to more of a soft takeoff position in which there's going to be an incremental buildup of technologies. And through that buildup, those of us who pay attention are going to find it comprehensible. We're going to be able to construct a path from here to there in retrospect. It's just building that path when looking forward is exceptionally difficult, because we can foresee some of the strands in that development, but we're not going to be able to foresee how these strands intertwine and essentially grow off of one another and have new strands originate because of the insights that are gained from those interactions.
You mentioned Ray Kurzweil a moment ago. I think I interviewed good friends of Ray Kurzweil, Charlie Cam, and also Jose Cordero recently, and what they said that relates to what you mentioned about Ray Kurzweil, that he's not just a man with a crystal ball. He's not just a lucky prognosticator. He was a man who was using the data in the smartest way, and that is how he was able to predict these emerging technologies well in advance of their development at this extremely high level, that almost would seem like that of a prognosticator, 80 to 85% correct on so many of these things. And I hope that one day I get a chance to speak with Ray Kurzweil. I'll probably start crying like a tiny little baby, but I hope that one day I would get a chance to talk to him. Now, you mentioned a few moments ago the idea that maybe we aren't facing a hard takeoff, which I will tend to remain philosophical on, but I would tend also to agree. There have been people in the news, organizations like Google Labs, organizations like DARPA, private organizations developing very advanced brain-computer interfaces, which would tend to allow humans to stay ahead of the curve with a runaway advanced algorithm or a hard takeoff. Do you encourage that sort of rhetoric? Do you think that is a worthwhile thing to be doing in the possibility of a runaway technology?
I think brain-computer interfaces are definitely a worthwhile goal. It is essential for humankind to develop a solution to the problems of information overload that we are facing today. The fact is, human endeavors are so multifaceted, and everyone is doing something, and everyone is producing content. So we ourselves are the originators of the information overload issue, but at the same time, we need to find a solution so that we can effectively keep up with the major developments in the world. And I don't see a solution that wouldn't involve removing the bottlenecks on the brain's processing capability. So one of the bottlenecks is we have a kind of linear single stream by which we absorb information. So when we read something, when we watch something, we focus on that at that time, and that expends our time. But we right now have to be very judicious about what we focus on, because in all of this ocean of information, we can't possibly absorb it all. It would be nice if we could. So if we had some of the capabilities that are routinely present in computers today, the ability to upload information very quickly and have perfect fidelity in the retention and recall of that information, that would be a paradigm shift, and that would enable tremendous human capabilities to be liberated, but also for humans to have a much more accurate awareness of what is happening in the world. Imagine if all of us could keep up with what all of the rest of us are doing and absorb that information into our minds, essentially by inserting the equivalent of a flash drive or an SD card. Of course, it would be a lot more sophisticated and integrated with our biology. But that would really surpass anything that human cognitive abilities have been able to do up to now, and it would enable us to overcome the information overload. I think once that capability is there, it could be upgraded incrementally, say with better storage space or better techniques for writing this information into our minds and retrieving it from our minds. But once it's there, essentially information overload doesn't need to be a problem ever again. And that, I think, is going to truly revolutionize all aspects of human endeavor.
Interesting. We spoke earlier in this talk about a more robust right to try. In the public health areas, we need to be utilizing every tool at our disposal. Now we're talking about a little bit different area. Some of these advanced brain-computer interfaces may be legislated in the future to be principally for otherly abled people, people who maybe have a locked-in syndrome or quadriplegic syndrome. Now, you and I would tend to want that to be something more open, but do you see any line where a Pandora's box might be opened by cyborgization or by advanced algorithms in this kind? What are your existential concerns?
I think the only serious concerns that I would have are in the area of safety. If certain devices have unintended negative side effects on how the brain operates, or if they're implemented without a good knowledge of the theoretical architecture of the human brain or what the entirety of their effects would be, that might, one, cause some people to suffer, which we don't want, and two, create a public backlash, just like, for instance, gene therapies experienced a period of public backlash after Jesse Gelsinger died in 1999, when essentially the gene therapy was administered to him via a virus, and that virus had adverse effects. So one unfortunate aspect of public perception today is that a single high-profile bad incident with an emerging technology gets blown out of proportion. We see that in the realm of autonomous vehicles, for instance, when 40,000 people in the United States die from manually driven vehicles getting into accidents each year. But when a single person dies because of some mishap that loosely involves an autonomous vehicle, and generally it's still human error or it's some setting that has actually been disabled in the autonomous vehicle, and the media are up in arms about it, and a lot of interests that are vested in the status quo will also blow this out of proportion and say, well, we can't be sure that this is safe if people are still dying from it, but they neglect the bigger picture. They neglect the lives that could be saved. So this is one difference between the precautionary principle and the proactionary principle that transhumanists advocate. The proactionary principle holds we need to address the potential benefits of adopting a technology as well as the risks, and in doing so we need to address the risks of not adopting that technology. So at the same time, public perception does play a role in how receptive the general population is to allowing free innovation to occur. So we definitely want to be careful about how these brain-computer interfaces are introduced. And I think that caution, of course, is part of the mindset of the researchers who are working on this technology. I think having incremental steps forward where at first the interfaces would be minimally invasive and they could give capabilities and effects that are generally understood to be harmless, that would be a good way to acclimate people to the very idea of a brain-computer interface. Oh, it can do this nice thing for you. It can calm you down sometimes, for instance, or it can help you focus a bit better. Those are very proximately attainable goals. Indeed, with some external electrodes, certain companies have been able to achieve those kinds of effects, and some people believe that they actually work. So in the future, building off of that foundation, increasingly additional capabilities could be integrated over time. And as long as there's not a dramatic incident of this technology backfiring, I think public opinion will remain fairly receptive. So I think safety is really the biggest concern. If it's safe, if it works, then the effects will be excellent and the positives will immensely outweigh the negatives.
Now, not so long ago, just a few minutes ago, you and I had a post-seminar extravaganza panel, and it was very, very exciting, this seminar and the events, and a great talk. It was good to meet up with Charlie and compare notes. I'm looking forward to seeing him and speaking with him again, Charles Holsopple, that is. And but something came up on that panel that I want to discuss with you a little bit more. In recent weeks, I've spoken to Paul Spiegel, an expert in law and public health. I've spoken to Martin O'Day, an expert in public health and business. I've spoken to an emissary from the Estonia, the Estonian e-governance presenter, and all on this subject of a specific kind of almost a pilot program. Now we could identify a developed, and Paul Spiegel has a lot of ideas on this, a small developed nation that has digitalization and infrastructure in place, and we could create a legal fund or put other pressures on to allow their public health service to become an immortalist public health service, a life extension of public health service. And the upshot, the advantage of this is significant. Because prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you're able to have this level of oversight of citizens, if you're able to incorporate data science and interventions in a comprehensive way, the costs of the public health service can drop dramatically. And what's more, in doing this in a locale of this kind, we could create a shining city on a hill that would be an example to all the world. That would say, hey, you're not a life extensionist. What's wrong with you? There's an entire country of people who are now life extensionists. You need to change the way that your institutions are organized. What do you think about this, given that it's not a kind of initiative that relates directly to United States public policy? What do you think about stunts in general?
Well, I think in principle it is a worthwhile concept to explore. As you alluded to, it couldn't be directly done within the auspices of a political party, but there could be an allied organization that pursues it, or indeed an alliance of several organizations. I'm sure a lot of scientists who research longevity are going to be interested in having a jurisdiction that is friendly to those research efforts. And I think the key challenge will be finding that jurisdiction and getting its assent to fostering that favorable environment. This is an area where the Seasteading Institute has had some experiences, and that it has been attempting to partner with jurisdictions to allow for experimental seasteads to be developed and bring more commerce, bring more tourism, as well as more experimentation to those jurisdictions. But ultimately, they have run into obstacles with each small nation that they contacted because, for whatever reason, the initial receptiveness turns into some resistance when other segments of the population find out about the efforts, and those segments tend to be more, let's say, status quo oriented, more change averse. So this idea of partnering with an existing jurisdiction has to consider ways to overcome that institutional resistance and locate a legal climate, a political climate that would be overwhelmingly receptive. I think it could work if there is a country whose government and whose populace are very much interested in differentiating themselves and also raising their profile as a haven for innovation.
That I would gladly like to visit such a haven.
Yes, indeed. And in the real world, every jurisdiction has some advantages and some drawbacks, and in some cases the drawbacks are obvious. We probably wouldn't be able to implement such a program in Saudi Arabia or in North Korea, but among the freer jurisdictions, there could be aspects of their laws which are quite friendly toward this idea, other aspects which are a nuisance or may, in some cases, be a deterrent. For instance, some jurisdictions may be more onerous in terms of tax policy, but may be friendlier in terms of the speed of approval for a small business. I think of New Zealand as an example of that as compared to the United States. It's a lot easier to form a business in New Zealand than it is in the United States, but the tax burden in New Zealand is fairly high compared to the United States. And there are sometimes trade-offs when going from one jurisdiction to another. I would say, in addition to policy, cultural considerations also need to be taken into account, because ultimately we would like to have a system like that take root and not be seen by a segment of the population as inimical to their culture.
Mm. Do you have as we're on the subject of some ideas about nations and their varying degrees of development, do you have any ideas of what you think might be the places, aside from the United States, where we might see takeoff effects, be they soft or hard?
Well, in terms of technological innovation, we do see a lot of technological development in China, in Japan. So those are nations that have been very keen on being at the cutting edge of progress. Now, in terms of how development happens in China, more of it is centrally planned, or at least influenced by the Communist Party, and there's a question as to what the outcomes of that would be and whether all of those outcomes would be beneficial. There is also a lot of startup activity in European countries. It's a bit different in terms of the focus and in terms of the regulatory climate there, but there are other respects in which Europe might be more receptive to innovation, particularly smaller European countries that seek to distinguish themselves, like Estonia. Israel has been another haven for innovation, both in terms of longevity research and artificial intelligence. So there is already a bit of jurisdictional competition. I would say the United States, by virtue of its history, by virtue of the amount of industry, including high-tech industry, and the amount of talent in this country, including talent that comes into this country from all over the world, still maintains a lot of the advantages in terms of innovation. But if there are other jurisdictions that offer unique benefits, having that competition is quite salutary, because then that serves as an impetus not to stagnate, and it serves as a reason to look outward and see what aspects can be borrowed from other jurisdictions that have adopted more technology-friendly policies.
Mm-hmm. And maybe in conclusion, shifting back to the domestic front, how do you feel about this election? What advice do you have for myself, for everyone involved in our primary election right now? What do you want to see happen right now?
So my advice is stay constructive, stay focused on the messages of your campaign, the kinds of changes, the kinds of policy stances, the kinds of effects that you would like to see in the world, the reasons why you would want the broader public to support you as a candidate. So whatever the flavor of your platform is, whatever the set of issues is that you hold at the forefront, focus on those and focus on making your best case to our membership as to why they're important and why our membership should support you. Ultimately, this election is intended to be an open forum. It's intended to be a way for candidates to communicate their ideas and persuade our members to vote for them, and more basically to persuade our members to vote. As those of us who have been following this election know very well, there is a 50% turnout rule in effect. So 50% of the then current members of the U.S. Transhumanist Party at the time voting starts will need to cast their ballots before we announce the results. And there is a deliberate design behind that rule, and that design is to get different segments of the transhumanist community to turn out and to get candidates to be building bridges among those segments. So no candidate can win just by virtue of their pre-existing constituency. They need to reach out to the transhumanist movement as a whole and to the broader membership of the Transhumanist Party, and they need to make a persuasive case for why they are the best candidates. And we are going to make resources available for candidates to do that, including the third virtual debates, which will take place in September. I say debates because we are going to split them into two segments to give the candidates more of an opportunity to interact and present their points of view. We're going to be creating additional resource pages for the candidates to host their campaign materials, their videos, their writings, other aspects by which they seek to distinguish themselves. But ultimately, to be successful in this election, candidates need to bring people in, not just into the party, but bring people into their message, into their fold within the Transhumanist Party. And that is a task that I think all of our candidates are capable of undertaking, and one that I encourage them to undertake.
Will that change to the website include video content?
Yes, it will include video content. If there's video that we can embed, we will embed it.
Very nice. Very nice. That's pretty cool. Gennady, you're a hell of a chairman, and you know what? You're a great leader to this organization. I'm so pleased to have gotten to know you and to know you in the course of this primary election. Thank you for doing this, sir.
Thank you very much, Ben. I really appreciate the discussion here, and I appreciate your enthusiasm and the tremendous outreach that you've been doing.